Welcome to Turning Pages, a series of in-depth conversations with authors about their works. Margaret Sweatman's latest novel, Nightbirds, a literary thriller through Goose Lane Editions. She is joining me on the program. Welcome to the show, Margaret.
Thanks for having me. It's very good of you.
My pleasure. So, do you have like a concise description of what this book is? Like, did you synopsize it yourself at all?
Well, I've been relying on the publisher's one because they call it, they say such nice things. I think that for me, I reread it yesterday because it'd been a while, and I was surprised by it in some ways because I'd forgotten. I was working on other things, and I think that it actually, quite a baroque plot and a reveal, like a narrative, a crime story in a way. But I think it began for me as something more romantic, like romance in the sense of castles and knights and hermits and people going underground. It began as a psychological thriller, I guess, and a psychological exploration, looking at things that are underground, mining and money laundering and dreams. So
It's funny that you talk about like the romance angle. I just happened to watch Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail recently.
yeah.
And weirdly enough, the Dowler character
Yes.
really made me feel like maybe it was like from like an Arthurian quest.
Yes, and that's the fantasy. He lives in a fantasy that he's in one, and it's very important to him. And so because he believes in it, he sort of does. He is kind of a steward, and he believes that one of the characters' fathers was an alchemist, which in a way they are because they can turn lead into steel. And so the story was really about transformations and transcendence, overcoming things, changing shape, changing value, people going underground and becoming, in a way, another version of themselves. And so yes, he and Dowler really lives according to some sort of fantastical chivalric code, and it proves to be true in a way. If you believe it, it's good enough, I think.
Yeah, it really got me thinking about secondary characters and what goes into creating like a backstory or fleshing out these secondary characters. Because I have to imagine you have a vision of maybe Farrar or Cleo like at the very beginning. But the people that they're surrounded by, are they like nebulous to start and then you start kind of fleshing them out? Or do you have a good picture of kind of these secondary characters?
It's a nice question. Well, actually, they show up and they can be, in a way, sometimes even more solid than the primary characters because you get to know the primary character in your early drafts through the narrative. And so you're developing the narrative. Whereas like Dowler walked up that road and his name was Dowler. And I knew, his belt size and his running shoes and his eyes. And he was fully fledged right away. And so sometimes those secondary characters are more, because they're slightly more, perhaps more static, they can go through changes, but whereas the primary characters are about change. So you are catching them on the fly, and you may learn things about them when you write your fifth draft and change the ending, and then therefore it's a domino game, and that changes them at the beginning, and you have to go through the whole thing all over again.
So he walks up fully formed in your head? Like you have a picture
He
of him?
just showed up. Yeah. I had Farrar driving down the road, and then he stops, and this man shows up, and his name is Dowler, and he's got this gruff, and he's a blacksmith, and he lives in the garage. And he just told me it does happen all the time. Like I'm sure it happens to lots of writers. It's most writers because characters are kind of platonic beings. They just show up. Jay Walker, Theo, they show up. They're really fun. It's very fun when that happens.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd had like as much thought about kind of the secondary characters as I had in reading this book because there's like some very distinct things that I'm like, what's going on? What's Margaret trying to say with these people? And it sounds like maybe they were saying something to you.
Yes, you entertain them and you try and listen. It really is hallucinogenic. And maybe I think another thing, the difference between secondary and primary characters is you have to kind of tell the primary characters what to do, and the secondary characters tell you what they're about. They're they're more kind of magical. Whereas the primary characters, it's just like Cleo went through lots of changes from very early drafts. She was a very different person. Something happens too with primary characters as they become more volitional as you gain drafts because they don't quite know their story yet. So they do change. They become more imperative, more decisive, more desirous, and more volitional. Because once you know the story, you can press on the gas. You can give it more dynamic thrust. So at first, you're kind of just listening to them and listening to your story. But secondary characters, yeah, they all just breeze in for the day.
You mentioned Theo. He's, if I'm not mistaken, the only character we get a POV from briefly, apart
Yes,
from Cleo and Farrar.
yes, that's right. And I was very glad that the publisher didn't object to that because it could be perceived as a mistake. Maybe it is, but I liked him to have. I needed the character. It's sort of like what happens after. It's sort of like a serial, and that was serial action, and so it needed to have him with Mark, this other character. They needed to have their own scene. I needed it for the narrative, for the reveal, and and when I reread it yesterday, I was relieved to find that I actually liked it. I felt kind of glad to get out of my two, like Cleo and Farrar, my two primary characters, glad to get out of their house and experience the story from another uh, vantage point. So yeah, and I love Theo. He's kind of like I have four brothers, and Theo's like one of my brothers, a little bit. uh, he just has that quixotic, like he's Hermes,
Hmm.
that and he's mercurial and he's always moving and he's never at home. But he has a very strong moral center, which I like about him a lot. All the characters have a strong moral character, even though they're center, even though they're, breaking the law, etc.
Yeah, so I do want to get back to that in a moment, but just kind of more on the Theo. Obviously, this allows you to kind of explain something that neither Cleo nor Farrar have access to,
Yes,
and a lot of what happens is about withholding, right? Like or
yes,
n- n- this kind of nebulous space between like trust and acceptance, where Cleo does something because Farrar tells her to do it, or Farrar believes something's happening because of what his mother-in-law had told him, right? And so this is like finally kind of like pulling back the curtain. This was obviously like the only way that we could find out about this while
yes,
still keeping Farrar and Cleo where they were supposed to be.
yes, yeah. It was necessary, and I felt like it was letting in fresh energy and um, because the story, like it isn't. It's sort of about their marriage, but it's got this other frame around it. So I wanted to go out to the broader frame, and so I needed that. Otherwise it's just a story about their marriage, which is it's only part of it. So and Theo, yeah, like Theo and Dowler have these sort of godlike qualities. Dowler is Kronos and Theo is Hermes. And so too, I kind of I just liked getting out of the house with them, and it was necessary, yes, for the information. Yeah, there's a chunk of information that I had to inhabit
Mm-hmm.
somehow.
You mentioned that Cleo and Farrar are the heart of it. What was the start of it? Like, where did you start with one or the other?
Um, in a way, it started with Cleo. Oddly enough, it came out of another project that I put aside, and so that's why I think she took a long time for me to. She took a long time to walk and talk fully on her own. Um, and then Farrar was pretty well. They both came from other places. Farrar was actually Theseus for a while, like in my head, a kind of a god who does go down to Hades, and a god of like a betrayer. And so they really had these kind of mythological qualities that weren't, don't do much for a story, but they worked at first just to get things up and running and learn the language of the story and learn the places and develop scenes that, a lot of scenes you write and then throw away, but the scenes that I could keep and that I felt were advancing the mystery. Um, so yeah, and then it's a few drafts in before I could really feel that they were on their own, and then could talk back to me. It took a while because they are dependent on the narrative, as I said. Yeah.
Right. And so when you're talking about them talking back to you, obviously you're creating the story that they inhabit. Is the talking back to you like, no, I wouldn't do this, or this is how I would do X or Y? Like what is that conversation?
You're kind of hallucinating and seeing the narrative as it unfolds. What time of day, how long they've been in that position, what do they want? Did they drink too much or sleep not at all? Are they frightened? And then you go into them and try and see it from their perspective. And sometimes they surprise you. Like Cleo often surprised me because she hallucinates. So I would actually try and enter her psyche or whatever, her mind and her imagination. And then things do show up if it is kind of a waking dream, writing stories. So you're trying to stay alert and see things. And so yeah, and I don't think the thing that they might say no to is a weak move in narrative. They are fictional characters. So if they feel that they're losing power or dynamism, then it feels false and you can feel them kind of pull away from you. And then, so you want to give them power to move around and make decisions. And I think, my early drafts, sometimes I have characters who are sort of sorry and regretful, and then that has to pass. And then I have to get them to be much more decisive and desiring so that the story can move forward.
So
Yeah.
speaking of decisive and desiring, obviously, like as you said, these people believe themselves to be moral, but maybe that some of their actions are not that way. Uh,
Yeah.
at its heart, like, is this kind of a no ethical consumption under capitalism notion? Like that, like you can't exist whether you're an artist or a craftsperson. You exist in a capital system. It's fixed, and ultimately, all of it is corrupt.
Not really. I don't think so. I wasn't, I think it's more that people try their damnedest to be good and then they make mistakes and they don't know the outcome of their mistakes till later. So it's not really a judgmental. I mean, obviously, I have qualms about the mining industry, but I also admire the mining industry. Um, and the books that I read about mining were quite beautiful. And hydro, the mistakes that we make, they're human. And so I think maybe it's more like the swarming. There's a murmuration in one scene, and the idea that people feel like they're acting with self-drive, but they're being modified by everyone around them, and kind of the tragedy of being human, that we are kind of trying to be good, and when people call you out, you're kind of shocked. You think, no, but I'm a good person. So it's more that kind of intrigue. I didn't really want to condemn capitalism. I don't mind that Farrar is going to get rich. It's fine with me. Uh, I mean, I think there's a, I mean, I am distressed about global criminality that we're seeing now, a mafia state that's a global mafia state with the war right now and with what's going on with our relationship with the United States. is criminal, and that's very troubling, and that's sort of what I'm writing about now. But I think with this book, it was more this sort of heartache of screwing up and hurting people that you love and damaging a planet that you love. Like Farrar is shocked when Dowler points out to him that hydro is damaging. He hadn't thought, oh damn, I didn't think of that. He thought his electrical towers were beautiful, and they lured him, and he fell towards his desire to make these magnificent this folly architecture. It plays a big role in it. That folly plays a big role in it. The folly architecture of electrical transmission towers that are ruining indigenous territory is kind of more folly than me condemning capitalism.
Right. It's interesting to hear you say, I didn't think of that for our as regards to the towers. It's just because, in some sense, a lot of this hinges on him not wanting to think of certain things, or at
Yeah,
least like turning a blind eye, or it's not necessarily an active thing, but that like having no quizzical nature is a boon to him.
having no which.
Like he's not trying to find out the source of the money.
That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. He does not try, and he's driven by that. I would say masculine feel that he will look after his family, protect the Cleo by not telling her anything. He feels that he's acting honorably, um, and it bites him. As many people, we all, especially with families, you feel like you're doing the right thing because you need to be selfish. You need to live your life. He's got a destiny in some ways. His Farrar means blacksmith. He's kind of, in a way, he's like another thing about this romance genre that I was so interested in with this book. It was driven by that he has a destiny, and it's bigger than him, and he has to live it. And it's going to hurt him. It's kind of tragic for him. Um, and it's out of love and ambition and courage. It was very courageous to build those towers for him. It was courageous to go to Romania. It was courageous even to take money. It was courageous to fall in love with Cleo. Uh, so I think he's kind of living out a destiny, but that's actually not kind of a moral position about what humans are. It's actually kind of working within the literary genre of the romance modality, where we see characters kind of tragically living out their fate or their destiny, their dharma. It's his work. He does it in his sleep. He makes he does he concocts alloys in his sleep. So it's in his subconscious as well as his consciousness.
Speaking of sleep, dreams play a part in this book, and
Yes,
obviously Cleo and Sydney keep a shared
yes,
dream diary, and we have instances of Cleo dreaming within the course of this book.
yeah.
How important was it to explore that and maybe like put that up against what was going on with Farrar?
Yes, yes. In a way, it started with dreams, and there were way too many dreams in the early drafts. Um, it was I've it was about the I was fascinated by, like, she is hallucinating, and she can't her boundaries between her waking and her sleeping mind are very thin, and so it's almost dangerous for her. She could have a car accident, um, and I think, like, I built the Five Towers was built on Carl Jung's Bollingen Castle, whatever he calls it. He's got this strange house he built um, in uh, in Zurich, um, because I was thinking too about this sort of the place where characters are not fully conscious, and that I think humanity isn't really fully conscious. I mean, we could even be destroying. We could go up in smoke. We're not fully conscious. I think that is one thing I'm saying. And that they live in this sort of situation of trying to act on symbols and on the guesswork and glimpses of beauty and desire that they cannot control, the desire for gold, the desire to build. Farrar isn't really greedy, neither is Dowler. They want to build stuff. They want to turn one material into another material. They want to see transformation. And that's dreams are like that. And the romance narrative too of one thing transforms into another. So the cause and effect is quite subliminal. I find that extremely, exciting to work with. It was,
Certainly.
yeah, it was really fun to write. Yeah, yeah,
I want to ask two structural questions. One of them is, the back and forth, other than the Theo portion, are split between Cleo and Farrar, and whether that was always going to be the case or if that came out through multiple drafts. And then I guess the other structural thing is essentially most of this takes place within a week, and whether choosing to put these people through this crucible is meant to be sort of like alchemical, and it's like this is the forge.
yes, exactly. Both those things. I love the compression and again that crucible, like, and literally, the crucible is one of the figure concepts of the book, and I'd always had that yin yang. It was always very much male female dialogue between, and they're both very male and very female, and that was right from the start. It was Phaedra and Theseus at first, so they were elementally female and male, and then to compress it. I don't really like flashbacks very much, when I'm reading them very much either, unless the writer's incredibly skillful, which many writers are. But I wanted to push them fast. I mean, there is a year in that week. There's also a year, so that was fun to work on the level of there's a narrative that is a week, and then we go back a year all the time, exactly a year, when Farrar commits himself to this difficult situation and goes to Romania. So and I liked the compression, and the Romanian scenes were from a year ago, and then the damage that took place in that year was interesting to me. What happened in the marriage, what happened to Jaywalker's illness, and the sort of terror of people hiding from a criminal for a year. That was interesting. Poor guys.
Well, even what happened a year ago is compressed into a very short trip to
Yeah,
Rosia Montagna, and it's interesting to hear you talk about like dreams that plays out like a nightmare for Farrar.
yeah, yeah, very much. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's nightmarish for him. Yeah, and he's sort of tricked. I like, yeah. There's sort of I like the idea of with dream narratives of the elision and the weird splicing of one scene next to the other. Um, so he and then he can't really tell the story when he gets back the way you can't tell your dreams. It's in him, and he can't, because if he tells it, his whole world will fall apart. So he's got this terrible secret from the people he loves. He's hoping they'll forgive him eventually.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, Obviously, like you said, there was the Theseus thing suggests maybe like you were tapped into some like Greek storytelling modal kind of
Yeah.
representation. Are you a big reader of Greek mythology, or was that something you did specific to this work?
It came from the project that I was working on before, and I abandoned it before, just as I was starting this novel. And so I was working on a play, and the project kind of fell apart. And so I was reading Anne Carson's grief lessons, her translations of Euripides, devouring them actually and reading them over and over again. And of course, Carson too. She's got such a loquacious, sort of vernacular, relaxed diction, and so she was she's very easy to read. So Euripides felt very contemporary, and so it emerged because of just the timing of abandoning this play. And then I thought, well, too bad about the play, and maybe it'll be a novel. So it evolved into that way, and and then I was reading. Forgive me, but this is Northrop Frye's Anatomy of Criticism, and looking at romance, his modality of romance, and seeing how, oh, kind of how 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 deep they can um, go into, where characters kind of merge with archetypes is really interesting, especially if they're still characters. So then you can feel the sort of, I don't know, plumb line or baseline with them. Um, and then, of course, mining. I was very interested in the mining catastrophe in Romania because that was an initiatory event. So then I was reading about Gabriel Resources in Toronto trying to sue Romania for money that they weren't making in a mine. And so that, of course, led to the idea of the criminal money that's running under us, and how um, um, immoral and how unlocal money is, how no one really owns it. And it's kind of a phantom force in our lives. It sure is now. I mean, I think money laundering is kind of at the heart of our really serious fascism that we're seeing now.
Yeah,
So,
I found it interesting because it also like the it's the Dacian gold. Like made me think about like kind of like it was a wellspring for this activity, but it was kind of that was the uncorrupted version of it, and that like everything
yes,
else kind of following on its heels is chasing it, but never catches up to it because of that.
yes, yes. I love that the gold was art, and it was uh, completely absorbed into a culture. Like, I think that's what we've obviously lost, where it was in their banners and and their clothing, and it related to their hunting, and then it was so that the art was not separate, art and weaponry as they are now. And the gold was it was part of the sun. It was sun. It was given to us from the sun, and it was related to the gods, and then the gods kind of betrayed them, and then it became empire. That's a beautiful kind of fable for the way that our art now, we're all kind of struggling to find a home culture in Canada for any of us in any country. I think right now, who are we? And we've become so homeless. And as a writer, or anyone working in any of the arts, what's your home language? And everybody is quite, I think, in every form that I know, that people I know working in visual art and music, um, uh, and maybe not in theater quite so much, they don't know who we are. We don't have a mother tongue. And so I love the Dacian, the stories, and they're therefore it's sacred. There's a spiral in the Dacian ancient first century temple, and so it does transcend our current reality and gives us access to another reality that is still kind of sacred, where human beings could have access to the sacred. And so, yeah, Farrar's father's trying to access that, and it's extremely painful for him because he's knocking on heaven's door.
Well, it seems fitting then that in a world where we're struggling with questions of who are we, that your own characters are maybe asking those same questions in Nightbirds. The book is out through Goose Lane Editions. Margaret, thanks very much for joining me on the program to discuss the book.
Thank you for the conversation. It was a wonderful conversation.